All right, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining. We're going to get started in just a second. I'm going to launch a poll question. If you could all just take a second to answer it, that would be great. All right, well, we will go ahead and kick it off. Thank you all so much for joining today for our discussion on how to tackle fraud in financial services before, at, and after login with identity. I just wanted to give a quick reminder that things that will be discussed today will fall under our safe harbor, as we may make some forward-looking statements. If you have any questions as we go throughout the presentation, please post them in the Q&A and we will answer them at the end. Now I'm excited to introduce Niraj. Please take it away.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you everybody for having us here today, and thanks for your time joining us. I would like you to first introduce David. David, if you could take a few minutes to kind of share with the team here and the audience, your background, where you're coming from, and what kind of extensive experience you bring to the table, and I'm honored to be with you talking about this topic today.
Thank you, Niraj. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend our session today. My name is Dave Janikowski, go by DJ because of the long last name. I am a senior solution architect at Okta. Been here just over 3 years, but prior to that, I spent 15 years working for different financial services companies, as well as 12 at a healthcare insurance insurer. So over 30 years experience as a developer and architect. And just before joining Okta, I was a chief architect at M&T Bank. It's a regional bank up in the Northeast, over digital money movement and identity. So looking forward to sharing what we've been seeing and hearing out there and how we can help you improve your fraud posture before, at, and after logon. Back to you, Niraj.
Yeah, thank you, David. And me, Neeraj Mehti, Vice President Solutions and BeyondID with BeyondID for over 4 years. And I'm a former Okta myself and been in the identity management space since late 90s. If some of you are or have worked with a product called SiteMinder, that's how my journey started back in late 90s. And since then, I've been just addicted to identity and helping our customers kind of help with different strategic challenges with identity. And today we'll be talking about how fraud can be prevented by the identity. So David, let's just get into the discussion of what we have prepared together.
Fantastic.
All right. So with that, what David I would go through is, some of the, things which you may or may not be aware of, what is happening in the fraud world when it comes to financial services, the common threats we are seeing. And then eventually what we want to really spend time with, like, how Okta plus BeyondID can help you prevent those frauds or reduce those fraud, which is happening at login, after logging and before logging. And we'll discuss different ways, we've been able to tackle that challenge and help our customers. And then finally, we will give you, some options to connect with us and kind of go deep dive with us on fraud. What are the different things we can help you with your fraud prevention, journey to prevent and save money for your banks or your financial institutions. But before I get into that, I want to also, share who BeyondID is. BeyondID is a managed identity solution provider. We provide services end-to-end, starting from assessment, architecture, implementation, integration, and continuous support and management for your identity needs throughout your journey. And we are, specialized in, financial services and fintech area and leading to zero trust security for all your needs there. So with that said, let's get into it, David.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about how how to balance, fraud and what we're seeing in the FinServe. So bank fraud is a major issue, causing serious financial losses for individual businesses and financial institutions. It's a serious crime. It can range in many different forms, from things we see like, back in the day of simple check fraud to complex schemes such as digital tax and account takeover, that lead to identity theft and money laundering. Some of these, some of this fraud can be small scale. Some can be larger, and lead to multi-million dollars in losses. And fraud isn't just limited to customers; it can happen within a bank as well via the workforce. This can be sending fraudulent wires. It could be leaking data. The thing that's important to understand, that combating fraud is a multifaceted approach requiring various capabilities and education. From my experience, it starts with identity, knowing who's on the other end, and being able to control those digital interactions. Niraj, what are some things that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, good thing which if you look at how banking has been changing from a digital perspective, we all love digital banking. We can bank from anywhere, right? Devices or your web portals or anything you do. I have a teenager son and I was talking to him about depositing a check, and guess what? He has never been to a bank because he doesn't have to anymore. So what that has done is it has definitely simplified our experience, how we bank, but it has simplified for the fraudster to be able to kind of get access to what we are doing. And what we are seeing in the industry is, fraud is kind of happening across the world. Even if you're a US bank or a North America bank, you've been frauded by other people from anywhere in the world because they can access your services. And while we are seeing that, what we are also seeing from our customers is like, yes, we want to prevent fraud, but at the same time, we do not want our, good users, people who are the good customers kind of go through this friction. Because yes, we can put multiple layers, but then the experience goes bad and they don't do banking with us. So there's a good balance we need to kind of create. That's what we're hearing. And what we are seeing is identity is at the center of it. Because based on the identity, you provide access to something or not, and based on that, the experience is also kind of important. And what David and I will be sharing with you, how we can actually create a good balance between security, fraud, and experience, which is very paramount, and that leads to your revenue generation or money loss prevention. So those are a few things, David, I'm seeing, but there's a lot going on. I mean, and the other thing which we all know, I mean, if you look at the news, there's every day somebody or other companies getting breached, data is being lost. What I tell my customers is like, just assume the password is already out there. Your information about your profile is also out there. So knowing that fact, how do we prevent ourselves moving forward?
There's just a great point. I mean, like you said, I mean, I think since all of us have been online for many years now, the likelihood that our information is out there and compromised in some way is absolutely true. And I love the fact that you brought up about kind of balancing that friction, right? I think many of our customers are expecting the different companies they interact with to have more intelligence and understand what's going on, who they are, what they're doing, what their patterns look like, and that they're trying to keep them safe. And of course, in financial services, keep their money in their accounts safe. So I think there's a higher expectation sometimes within this, that that the organizations are doing the right things. And what we've kind of started to see out there, again, financial services are certainly some of the most vulnerable organizations to cyber threats, mainly because there's a bunch of money at the other end along with data. Finance firms approximately lose about 5.9 per breach, and that's 28% higher than the global average. And what's happening there is they're starting to turn their focus to identity. So that's why we hear about identity theft and why it's important to protect that, because that's usually a gateway in. So Neeraj, have you been seeing some different things across other industries as well?
Yeah. I mean, what I'm seeing is a lot of, medium size or small scale banks are not even being reported, right? And, talking to them, I know they're losing, tens of millions of dollars in fraud, annually. I mean, and for those small banks, that's a lot of money. And if you go higher, I mean, it gets more and more. And one of the key reason what I'm hearing is, account takeovers. And if you look at, some data, 1 out of 4 Americans have been victims of ATO, account takeover. So that's how prevalent it is. But dollar amount, I mean, there was one report I was reading, they even talked about our GDP. if we could prevent fraud, our GDP could be up by point something, which is huge, right? When you think about trillions and trillions of dollars, that's how deep this problem is. And even the reports we're seeing, the numbers you're seeing, I think it could be probably even larger. As I said, some of those things are not even getting reported. So it's a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, it is a very large issue out there. So let's talk a little bit about some common fraud that we're types that we're seeing out there. And Neeraj mentioned account takeover is one of the big ones, right? Banks are at a high risk for that amongst other industries, not just unique to banks. But this is when unauthorized user gains access to the customer accounts and login credentials. One thing that I've seen across working at multiple banks is that, especially with online banking, lot offer self-registration, but there's certain population that may not actually, register and enable their online presence. And there's been a big effort around trying to figure out what those accounts are and go ahead and register that account so that they can move money or out. If that was through old ways of bill pay and in the bill pay world, the way it used to work is if it was an electronic bill pay, they would cut a check. But now with P2P payments like Zelle, it's a lot easier once you register somebody's online account to start moving out money and testing that out. So account takeover is still a big deal. And the other thing you start to see is the phishing attacks out there, where there's fake emails, texts, clicking on things. People can recreate what looks like your banking logon screen behind the scenes as a bad actor, grab those credentials, and if there aren't proper fraud controls in place, even starting with basic MFA, it's a lot easier for them to get in. The other thing, again, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but it's not just customers. Bank employees also are at risk for phishing attacks. For instance, call center fraud is a growing problem. Instead of the attacker posing as the bank and contacting the account holder is coming in and trying to basically pretend they're somebody who they're not and start to gain account details. And again, it may not just be used in the instance of trying to gain access to banking, it might be for something else that they're trying to get those credentials for. So again, those are two big ones that I've seen. Neeraj, what other areas have you been seeing out of this?
Yeah, you mentioned David phishing. I was so surprised how high this has grown. 4,000% up after ChatGPT was brought to service. So which has been what, 2 years now or close to 2 years? Because people are able to kind of, create so awesome website or messaging or pages which look really, really, really so close to being real, and people are being frauded. So yeah, phishing has been a biggest one. And phishing is also leading to social engineering. That's another one which we are seeing a lot. I mean, if some of you might remember the MGM story, right? MGM was shut down for almost 10 days. They went back to paper and pen, to kind of, support their customers and whatnot. What really happened there was somebody called, like the call center, David, you mentioned about, somebody called into the help desk center. It's like, hey, I'm so and so, and they found that user on LinkedIn being the admin of their identity product, right? They kind of social engineered into getting that username password reset and even the MFA factor. Guess what? I mean, they provided all the questions they wanted to ask, which is typically how you want to kind of, identify an individual. And they were able to reset that, and that person got into the account and created additional, mole accounts into that system. So when the real user came in, they thought maybe I forgot my password. They reset it, they got their account back. But guess what? The fraudster was already in there and kind of waiting for the right time to do things, and they started kind of stealing things and shutting things down for ransomware and things like that. So this is also happening on personal front too. I mean, you might have seen sometimes people calling like, hey, I'm calling from your bank, and by the way, I've just sent you SMS message. Could you provide that, because we are seeing some bad activity on our account and we want to prevent you from losing your money. So they will create that sense of urgency and put you in that kind of mind, like, oh my God, I gotta do something. And you will share those contact or SMS or the second factor. Because remember, I said the username password is already on the dark web. Whether we want to accept it or not, it is out there, unfortunately. So that's one thing we're seeing. Another thing which is kind of funny and interesting, and I actually know through some close friends, that somebody got frauded by a romance scam. You'll be like, what the heck is this? Well, I mean, people getting into relationships, online and all that stuff. So fraudsters are kind of, getting really good at that. And then once you get to a point, you start sharing information about your account, and guess what? They're emptying your bank accounts and even your retirement account. And this is real. So if you want to go search it up, you will get a lot of hits on it. So
No,
essentially, what we're seeing is a lot of things are happening, and social engineering, phishing, account takeovers are getting easier than what we think. And even people like us who are in this industry are, kind of finding it is hard to prevent yourself because they are so real.
yeah, no, I hear a lot of those stories. When you were talking about some of those social engineerings, I mean, my in-laws fell victim to where their Microsoft was asking them. The message was that you're out of compliance. You need to call some number. They call that number. Next thing I know, they're giving away their bank account information. I'm like, what are you doing? And there's a number of occasions where my dad will say, hey, I got this text about calling this number and providing information because there's some fraudulent activity, and when you look at the email or the phone number it came from, it's like totally fraudulent. But I can't tell you how many times. And again, it's just a barrage, and they're going to hit it. So it really, as we get further in today's discussion, it's going to be important to understand that fraud, there isn't one silver bullet to sort of combat fraud. It's a bunch of capabilities and applying them throughout the process. So totally see that. And what do from working with so many different customers, what are some of the impacts you're seeing out there?
Yeah, David, the biggest one, I hear from my customer is the brand reputation. Because at the end of the day, fraud happens, whoever is the victim of it, they're going to share with other people. Or if you're really unfortunate, you probably get on the headline somewhere, right? And we have seen many of those going. So not only it impacts their business, it impacts their brand value, which impacts their, finances, because they start losing customers or stop getting new customers. And then obviously the legal, regulatory compliance fees and all that stuff, and the investment they need to make in securing, right? Because this is an ongoing thing which you got to continue doing. So you got to make continuous investment in security, because fraudsters are getting better and better. Whatever, things we bring in, they probably move a step further up. So those are the things we are seeing, kind of from a loss perspective. But if you have to really, consolidate down, I mean, it's economic losses, right? Some kind of money, whether it's brand, whether it's legal costs, whether money loss, or the insurance cost is going up too, by the way.
No, you're absolutely right. That's a big one. I mean, as these things are happening, a lot of organizations are seeing increased cyber insurance, and I started my career as a developer, and one of the kind of foundational things was that it was always better to find a bug early and fix it earlier in the software development than later. It became more costly. And I feel like fraud is very similar. Yes, there's a cost to preventing fraud, but if fraud does occur and all those things that we talked about, reputational damage, loss of customers, increased costs, higher cyber insurance, it's better to deal with them upfront than on the back end and in recovery. Right. I mean, it's real simple, right? I mean, so many people, I mean, it's like, oh, don't worry, it's on a credit card. Somebody will pay for it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's consumers who pay for that, right? So we're going to see that in our everyday lives. And a good example, I go back to my days at M&T, and I worked on the Zelle implementation and the design and all of that. And one of the things because I've had the I'll say luck and experience to work across different lines of business, in that we worked very closely with our financial crimes, and financial crimes was saying, hey, there's a lot of additional fraud capabilities we should be putting in place before we kind of do this P2P. And if you've been watching the news, Zelle was getting pounded a lot for all the losses and the fraud. And I can tell you firsthand that when push came to shoves and we're looking at the overall budget, some of those controls, especially around identity proofing and risk scoring and all these other things, were sort of left out of our implementation. So Zelle itself wasn't necessarily in some way overly flawed with some, big, Trojan horse sitting in it. It was a lot of cases that the access to it from registration to using it, many of the banks didn't have the right fraud controls in front of it, which ultimately left to some of these fraud losses. So again, it's not just one thing that can solve all. And I'm curious, if others have had those similar challenges around, trying to get the right capabilities and the funding up front, because it might be viewed as just an expense and not necessarily, something flashy, or again, wasn't accounted for. But again, curious to what others are seeing out there.
Yeah, David, one thing we are seeing with our customer as we are working with them, you gotta have metrics supporting it, right? The investment we are making in this thing, how would that really, come as an business outcome, which is you're basically saving money or growing your revenue, right? So those are the exercise we go with our customers. So let's say if you're a customer, you're losing, I don't know, just pick a number, $20 million in fraud, through online, account takeovers with investment of $1 million. I mean, if you can reduce it, I mean, that's excellent, rate of ROI on your investment, right? So those are the conversation we are having with the customer, and we have kind of different ways to kind of help them on those things to make a business case too.
That's
But
great.
very important, very important.
So now I know we talked a lot about sort of, kind of setting the stage, like what we're seeing, what kind of fraud is out there, what are some of the impact of it. But what we really are here to talk about, and sure why many of you joined, is kind of understanding sort of like, well, how do we combat this, right? What does a fraud architecture look like? And I know we mentioned at the beginning about before login, at login, after login, and why is that important, and how does that all look? So Neeraj, before I get make a couple points there, I wanted you to kind of maybe speak to from
Yeah.
your experience personally, and as well in industry and BeyondID, kind of what you've seen out there and what you've seen successful.
Yeah. So I know there's a lot on this architecture side. And by the way, as you can see from the colors and the choices which David and I use, it's done by techies like us. So this is not a architecture. So this is real. This is actually some customers who are kind of implemented some of those things. That's what you see here. So this is kind of from the field to you guys. So just to kind of explain what you see. So if you focus your eyes on the right-hand side of the picture, which is after login, which is what, your crown jewels are, your online banking applications, Q2, Fiservs, anything else or custom or enterprise applications you might have, for wealth management, mortgage, and things like that. I mean, a lot of different things which you as a bank or as a financial institution might be serving to your customers. So that's what we are trying to protect here. Now I'm gonna, take a focus on the left side of the architecture, which is before login. If we see three type of actors, if you will, who are probably interacting with these crown jewels, which is your new customers, some customers who want to join your, bank for checking, savings account, or other services you might be offering. And then your existing customers, who are already kind of accessing some of your offerings, but also be potential for new offerings which you want to kind of offer them. And then finally, the bad actors, the account takeovers, who are probably getting into your applications using existing customers or trying to be new customers with some kind of synthetic identities and whatnot. So what we want to do is in the middle, we have this at login, picture where we have Okta as the identity platform in the middle. You have API layer, which is Apigee, MuleSoft, whatever you could be using. And then you have channels because your users could be coming from mobile device, desktop, or maybe any location anywhere, right? And then at the bottom, if you see, we have different threat signals which we can get to prevent fraud from. The good news is, if you think about a user, we know the device they're coming from. We know the location they're coming from. We know the IP reputation they're coming from. We know some behavior analytics about them with technology today. And combining all those signals and other signals from other third parties, we have a lot of information about the user to make some, decisions on the risk of that user who's coming in. So if you look from the new user, some of the use cases you probably see is, hey, I'm a new user. I want to sign up with your bank. So I need to do the KYC. And how do you do KYC in a way where we can digitally identify you with confidence that, let's say David was the user who was kind of coming in, digitally verifying him before we can create their account so that because we need to be compliant from a banking perspective, at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not getting the synthetic identity of David into our system. And that's where, the fraud layer, if you look at it, there are products out there, there are, companies who are helping, like, Socure, LexisNexis, Onfido, which can digitally identify you by looking at your government issued, document, which could be a driver's license, it could be your, passport, and then aligning that with your physical identity, looking at your face, liveliness, and many other vectors I talked about. We can look at your device health, where it is coming from, location perspective, the IP you're coming from, and the way you are actually entering the information, because bot attacks are also very common. The fraudsters are probably not typing all the stuff all the time because they are trying to do a lot of those things. So they try to automate and use bots to do it. So those are some things we see on the new customer side. So David, I would like your input and your ideas when you look at new user, new customer kind of coming in from a technology perspective. What are the different things or capabilities you kind of like, add to make sure that we can capture some of that stuff, before login or before registration happens, to prevent some fraudulent users to even come in?
Yeah, and I think you made some really good points. And back in the day, and I think you mentioned this earlier, is that a lot of our information is out on the dark web somewhere. And one of the practices before, what we call identity proofing or verification with a driver's license, there's a lot of knowledge based stuff. You lived at a certain address, you had a mortgage, you own a car. Well, guess what? That's public information, right? So I think, that was a nice step forward, but that as we move forward, that we have to look at a lot of different attributes as we're thinking about it. So you have your identity verification. There's other services out there, for instance, if this is the first time and you're signing up for an account, that do email reputation score, mobile phone score. So that, hey, that email that was just used was created like 6 hours ago. And oh, by the way, it was just used in, 100 different attempts at account opening. Same thing, right? So again, not one of these things may give you the full, comfort that you say, great, we stopped the fraudster at the door, but it's a combination of these. So you have things of that nature. You have the ability to look at the IP when they're choosing passwords. We know our passwords are out there, but having the ability to know that the user's putting in a breach password, but heck, maybe we shouldn't even be using passwords at all, and trying to get more to passwordless. So that's things like passkeys, having a phishing resistance authenticator, things of that nature as well. Other things that we look at is behavior analytics. How does a user move? What are the pauses between things? And again, back to, just to reiterate, the device itself. Has it been jailbroken? Does it have malware on it? So you're trying to take all of these within. And again, we're talking about new customers, and some of these things can be leveraged later down the road at login or after login, but we're going to focus right now before login. And the important thing is, when there's like, when a new customer and you're acquiring a customer, there's talking about, how much does it cost to acquire a new customer, things like that. When they're signing up for a new service, this is a great place to start to introduce some things like the identity proofing, because we know there's a cost to that, right? But that might be a place you can do it to start, right? So that's part of when you're taking on a new customer, you include that in your plans for how much that is, and you get that done up front. At the same time, you're starting to build sort of a behavior and starting to get analytics on how that user is interacting, what they do, so that once they become a customer, and then when we get into at login and after login, we can start to see what seems standard for them or not standard, and apply a different risk score with that, so that at that point we can look towards using step-up authentication, MFA, things of that nature to sort of combat that. So that's where some of the thoughts I have around sort of what we could do before login.
Yeah, so another benefit, David, we are seeing with our customers, by kind of putting all those capabilities and technology in front, it is actually getting the good users approved quicker, right? Because what happens is, because if you're doing the traditional way, you're probably taking longer for good users to get through, because you got to do your KYC. And with this, not only you're preventing fraud, but you're also kind of increasing your new customer addition rate through a smooth process. So that friction we talked about also reduces by putting this fraud prevention use cases and technologies we're talking about. So now let's move on to the existing customer, right? Because it is very important for existing customers to have a flawless experience. As you and I, we talked about, we know the existing user, because we know the device they come from, right? Because they have been there before. We know which location they typically come from. We know about that, right? We know the IP addresses they've been coming from. We know the behavior, how they kind of come in, what time and what devices, how they type and all that good stuff and many other things, right? So when we see signals, which gives us great confidence that this is the right good user, we can actually remove a lot of friction from their access. But let's say that good user, so let's say, David, you were the good user, you come from your Buffalo area all the time from the device, which we have seen all the time, but all of a sudden you were traveling on vacation to Italy, right? And you had a need to kind of do a wire transfer, and it's like, okay, I need to get back on my account. We see you come in, okay, you got the username password, which I said, we would assume that was already compromised, not a big deal. You also provide your factor, which is your SMS, by the way. Well, we know that can be SIM swapping, and that can also be captured, or somebody was kind of around you to capture that. All right. But we know your location. David typically doesn't come from here. What we can do is, hey, you've given all the right credentials to be in your application on my platform, but I still have some risk I see. We can actually create a workflow where we kind of get you into identity proofing or identity verification, where you have to kind of prove yourself, right? And you as a user would appreciate that, because it's like, hey, something is different about me, and which is great. Let me prove myself, from identity verification with your passport or ID and anything like that, which we can verify you. That prevents us from getting the bad user in. Remember, username password compromise, SMS compromise, but it'll be hard to break into your identity verification. And once you're there, and then even if you're in the application, let's say typically your pattern has been you're viewing your checking account, savings account, mortgage balance, auto loan balance, or something like that. But now you're also trying to make a money transfer. Typically we have seen you do money transfer from your banking application, getting signal, a few $1,000s here and there you transfer, but all of a sudden you want to make a larger transfer, let's say $20,000, right? That raises another risk level, like, okay, this is a behavior we haven't seen from David, and then we can initiate another step of authentication, another factor to make sure it is the right user, and also to avoid session hijacking. Sometimes what happens is you could have proven yourself initially, but somebody hijacked your session and kind of replaying that, and now trying to do the transfer you want. So again, we have multi-layer kind of prevention from fraud to happen. And if all these things are not enough, we are also looking at continuous monitoring and detection under the covers. All the logs, all the different signals, all the other applications kind of feeding us about your behavior and your past, kind of gives us additional information to kind of inject and stop fraud from happening, or at least elevate the authentication authorization level to prevent it.
And that's a great point. And you mentioned a couple of things like session hijacking and things like that. And, one of the things that's been happening in the industry is there's something called FAPI, financial grade APIs. And that's come from the OpenID group that recognize that when interacting with financial services, and again, these can be beyond that, it can be something that's highly regulated, but that they realize that the standard kind of OAuth and OpenID Connect stuff wasn't enough. And so they set out to essentially establish a higher grade of standard for financial APIs, and that comes with there's FAPI 1 and FAPI 2 certification to be able to provide using sort of underlying technologies like PAR and RAR, a lot of tech jargon underneath there, but the idea of that is to keep things out of the front channel, to combat things like session hijacking, to be able to show demonstration of proof, and that is important as a signal from these governing bodies that we're kind of moving away from what I say, we're moving towards what I would say is like an open economy, where it's not just somebody's logging into your bank anymore. It's third parties are looking to access that information, if that's a Credit Karma, things of that nature. So it's not just contained anymore. It's starting to become more open banking in the US, right? How we define it, where you're doing a lot of that account aggregation and sharing this information, where you're doing payments on retail sites. So it's important to have a higher grade of security, even at the API level. And, that's why, we talk about Okta there in the middle as the identity platform. We've launched something called highly regulated. And the idea there is that it's to include these new standards to strengthen that control and provide a platform that's extensible that allows you at different points, if it's before login, after login, at login, to talk to different fraud services at different time, taking multiple risk scores, and they determine what's the appropriate action to do next. And that's sort of something that we're starting to see, again, that's gaining more steam out there. Again, I'm not sure how many folks on the call are familiar with FAPI and some of those standards within there. We're seeing a lot of it down in South America, where it's going to become a standard in, I think, July of 2025, that you do third-party interactions. Again, think Credit Karma, or Mint or something like that. I think Mint became Credit Karma, but it's something you're going to have to implement. But again, these are things that are evolving out there and that are important to continue to keep people safe.
Yeah. And David, that which is great information, where the other world is moving faster than America right now. So we gotta keep an eye on that. Another last use case I want to talk about, the help desk and support. We talked about that MGM story. We talked about bankers calling their customers, the fake bankers, I mean, and kind of getting access into their account. So we can actually kind of prevent that from happening through fraudulent or a bad actor trying to kind of gaining access to somebody's account through a help desk by providing the information they're looking for. What we can do is, again, we can introduce that identity verification in the process. If somebody calls the help desk, we can send them either a link on their phone or an email or something where they can get into even the bank and kind of click something and verify themselves digitally to make sure they are the right person before they can even do any self-service reset password or MFA. Because a lot of time we all know, I mean, people lose their phone or they got a new phone and they want to kind of go ahead and reset their factors. That's another place fraud happens, and we want to make sure that we are inserting different layers of security, different layer of challenge, which they need to prove themselves with digitally, again, removing the friction, making it easier for the user to do it, and then able to get where they need to do. And this not only helps the banks, from reducing their help desk call, but also keep them safe from fraudulent users to gaining access. I don't know, David, if you have seen, capabilities, from your vantage point, which you guys have been applying to kind of prevent fraud from happening from help and support.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about FAPI, and I'm going to kind of zoom in on one of the capabilities called rich authorization consent, and another one called CIBA, which is called client initiated back channel authentication, fancy words. But one of the things that can be done is, we talked about certainly doing the identity proofing, and if it's never been done, you can do that during that call. But if it has been done, and we know that, and the person has installed a mobile banking app, you can turn that into an authenticator. And what that means is you can send a signal when a user calls in to the call center, screen pop comes up. They're like, oh, okay, recognize this number, whatever the case. You say, I'm Dave Janikowski. They're great. We look up the account. They send, with a push of a button, they can send an authorization request to that user with context. You're calling into the call center at this time. You asked, maybe you went through an IBR and you asked something specific, you're asking about account information, but it can provide detailed information about what you're doing. That user then can see that authorization request. And if it's really you, you're like, yep, that's me, I'm calling in. But imagine to the experience that Niraj was talking about, where I was in Italy and they're saying, hey, all of a sudden I get a push notification saying I'm calling call center. I'm like, no, I'm not. Boom, you can shut that down immediately. So it's providing that context and that same technology. Again, this is all part of that FAPI standard, but that and part of Okta's highly regulated solution. But that also can be used at the transactional level. So the days of where you get a text saying, hey, you did something, is that you? You can provide context. I'm moving money from my checking account to my savings account with $1,000. I'm doing it from Buffalo, New York. This is the time. This is the device I'm doing it on. Again, there's rich context. So what's fantastic about that, because one of my concerns is I know there's been a lot of adoption within the call center around, hey, record a voice, your voice, so that we can identify you that way. I'm telling you, with some of this AI stuff, I'm getting a little. I would say, in my opinion, that technology is hit its life. It's going to be sunset. Like,
It's been broken. It's
can't
been
trust
broken
it. I mean,
already.
what do you think, Naraj?
It's been broken. I agree. That
Right?
voice technology thing, I think it's out the door with AI. That's why we got to continue to stay ahead of the fraudsters, what they will be coming next with. So any number of technologies we'll keep bringing, I'm pretty confident they will try to break that in, because that's a job they are in. And if you think from their point of view, I mean, it is simple, easier for them to sit from anywhere in the world and try to gain access and make easy money. That's why you're seeing a lot of this happen, right? It's not that people are doing because they paid. I mean, just some people are just, kids could be just bored and kind of trying to break in, and then once they start getting this money, easy money, it's like, hey, I don't have to work, I can just kind of make, and the laws are not strong enough to kind of get these people to some kind of jail time. That's another thing. That's why people continue to do what they're doing, and with the Bitcoin payments and all that stuff, I mean, it's just hard right now. So as organization, as we in the industry, we are trying to prevent or at least reduce, from the low hanging fruits, which fraudsters are getting very easy to use kind of scams and able to do it. So, but this will definitely prevent, if not 100%, but we have seen, numbers from anywhere from 70 to 80% kind of reduction.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I think, the thing that as I think through this again, there's many capabilities that are needed. They continue, new ones come on, they continue to evolve. And what you need is trusted partners and folks who understand this, the industry, what's happening with the fraudsters, and being on a platform that allows you to own your own identity and be able to interact with these different services when appropriate, right? Some of the legacy technology and things like that sometimes doesn't let have that flexibility. Like, you want to introduce these things into your environment, but it's hard, right? So I think, one thing important for me is that you own identity and you have the right partners you're working with to help kind of navigate this ever evolving landscape. And again, it's not one fraud capability, it's a laundry list of them, and it's important to balance them along with the user experience so that you're keeping them safe, but also providing the best possible experience so that you continue to retain the customers that you have and hopefully grow from there. So one of the things that I'd be asking if I was attending this webinar, how can we engage you if we're interested in learning more and help, just kind of look at what maybe we're doing today, or how we can look at building a better fraud strategy down the road?
Yeah, no, great question, David. Hopefully everybody enjoyed, what David and I enjoyed about the fraud prevention things, which can be done today, and we can be helping you or maybe guiding you with what you've already seen. So with that, at Beyond ID, we offer, a few things for you. One is Digital Identity Blueprint Workshop. What this workshop does is we actually understand your strategic goal. In this case, could be, hey, I want to reduce my account takeovers or reduce my fraud by X percentage. What can you do with my existing technology or the new technology I have to make investment with? How do I calculate the ROI? What is that roadmap, and what would it take for me to do that? So we can help you with that, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing is, we have actually also created a demo. So right today we shared with you, the architecture high level, people who are interested, who want to see something live in action, how this really works, we are happy to kind of engage with you and let us know. We'll be happy to do a one-on-one demo for you to kind of show you how this technology is working. And then finally, we also have an option of data study. I know you might be thinking, what is that? So a lot of customers come to us is like, okay, you talk about, you can prevent this, prevent that. So we have partnered with Socure, and what they do is we can request some data from you, maybe, last 3 months, 6 months, and look at that data, analyze, and give you a report on it, where we saw the fraud, where we saw improvement, and what are the different things we could have prevented or made your users kind of increase the adoption of your registration or other things you might be doing. So it can give you a really factual information from your own data, and you don't have to, kind of make us connect to your system. You can just give us the data in a very secure format, and we can talk through that. But this is a couple of weeks effort, on our part to kind of present to your report on what we see through your data. And then finally, if you're going to be at Octane next month, David and I both will be there. We'll be happy to engage with you in a conversation. If you want to talk about something specific or your specific challenges, we'll be very open to meeting with you. And you can find us at booth P1 at Octane.
Fantastic. I certainly want to thank everybody for spending time with us today. We're hoping this is useful, and we do have a couple minutes. I see there's a few questions. Neeraj, maybe I can read you one, and you give your thoughts, and I can add on
Sure.
to that. But one of the questions was, how should we integrate fraud prevention systems with our broader cybersecurity tools and processes?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is, I mean, a lot of these tools are using open APIs, and then the signal framework, which is kind of, taking form. So we can use that data to kind of bring in to the systems. Like in Okta case, you can actually kind of get those signals from different systems. And based on that, you can actually have a risk score kind of defined. And based on that risk score, you can elevate the authentication level, or step up authentication, or whatever you want to do, or maybe kind of have a workflow to go do something else. So there are, a lot of different ways to do that. And in the architecture we're talking about, that's one thing we are injecting, from the identity verification product, kind of getting the signal. And based on that, identity platform, in this case, Okta, is kind of making some of those choices, or actions, if you will, to take the next step on that request.
That's great insight. And there's another question here. I guess I can take this one.
Sure.
Are you seeing fraud both from the customer side and workforce side? Absolutely. We tried to mention that a little bit earlier, that absolutely, fraud, it's customer side, it's workforce side. In financial services, that could be, on the workforce side, that could be data leakage, that could be wiring money. And it's important, like, especially for elevated access and things like that, making sure the right people have, if they're accessing servers and things like that, back to, I think Neeraj mentioned zero trust, right? That's a big part of what BeyondID does. Zero trust. I mean, I'm seeing some of my, I had a healthcare customer talk to me about their, and they should be very concerned about ransomware. Like what happens if that we can't provide services, we can't pay claims. I mean, it's very real. So it's across the board, and sometimes you even see, and I don't want to say it's small fraud, but I seen something out there that was pretty interesting. Some folks allowed their employees to access their HR system to update their information, where their paycheck goes, that kind of thing. And for whatever reason, that company, they wouldn't allow them to implement some type of multi-factor. And the fraudsters got in and started rerouting people's paychecks to some other account, somewhere very small. So again, I think we see it across the board, and it can be something that's seen, and that isn't trivial, especially if your paycheck goes missing. But something like that, to wiring out millions of dollars from an organization. I got
Yeah.
another one for you. And have you seen anything
Yeah,
near
yeah,
before
David.
I kind of go on to the next question if we have
Yeah,
time?
yeah, no, I want to add to that. I mean, when we talk about total experience, employee is part of it. Remember, we talked about that help desk use case or a customer service use case? That is your employee. When a customer is interacting, you got to think about, securing them too. Because if they could, reset a fraudster, or a fraudster coming in and they're tied up with them for whatever reason, they could be resetting accounts and giving away the account information, right? So how do you prevent that from happening? And the use case that Davis was talking about, you're going to send a request to their phone, which they have to authorize before even they can look at their account, right? This is becoming more and more common. So when we think about fraud and security and experience, I think it's a connected experience. And I think it's a total experience you got to think about. And not only limited to employees, I would even extend it to your partners and contractors and other people, or organizations you do business with, which we all know, we are all kind of connected from different ways. And that's another place, we got to be careful of preventing fraud from, because sometimes we miss that side, the partners or the contractors and things like that.
And I mentioned the OpenID group, and there's another thing out there called shared signals. For those, on the phone call, if you haven't heard about that, definitely read up on that. And that's the ability for, think about when you connect to, a VPN, if that's through, somebody like Palo or something like that. But being able to send signals that something's different back to your identity provider to say, hey, something's changed since they've already been logged in and doing activities, and that then you can take action if that's log them out, step them up. So there are a growing number of capabilities that are out there, and some are coming out as standards from groups like the OpenID. But it's really important to kind of look at it holistically, from both, the customer side and the workforce side. knowing who has access to what, do you have the right controls when accessing things. So again, I know we spent a lot of time on customer today, but be rest assured, if you want to deep dive into partners and workforce, Neeraj and I can do that as well if you come visit us at Octane. So one final question I have for you, Neeraj, this
Yep.
came out, is that how can fraud prevention and digital experience teams work together to ensure both security and a smooth user-friendly experience?
Yeah, it's education, David. What I've seen is when you talk to digital officer, digital experience officer, by the way, they are involved in these projects now, right? Because we talked about the experience. I'll give you an example. One customer, they were reluctant to even turn their MFA on. I said, why? It's like, oh, my customers would not like that. These are senior people. I cannot have them have any friction in their access of account. I said, all right, what about if we did a passwordless for them? Right? And look at the signals and kind of make it easy, even easier than what they are today. So again, I think it's a lot of time you just have to kind of show them what is possible and kind of walk them through, have them experience it. And that's when you would start seeing that, oh, they start buying into it. And then the other thing you have to also remember the change management, because this is a change. For us, it might be passwordless. Oh, that's easy. But somebody who's never used it, it's a big change. They're like, hey, why am I not getting challenged with anything? So you have to kind of incorporate change management, which is the communication and all that stuff, which needs to go in play to make sure when you are doing that. And that's not only for customers, you have to internally kind of socialize that too. So when we talk about these things, cross-functional team needs to be educated, need to be bought into, need to be kind of shared where this thing is going so that nobody's surprised. So yeah, it is a big one of the pieces to make these kind of solutions being successful.
Absolutely. And it's interesting enough. There's a thing in the webinar chat from Felipe Ward, and he just mentioned, we talked earlier about sort of the whole voice biometric and thing like that. And he says, I think we need to be careful on the voice identification controls and the potential limitations. And I think that's spot on.
Exactly.
I think that's spot on. And again, with all these things, right? What's good today might not be good tomorrow. So we always have to keep our eye on the ever changing landscape and ensuring that we're doing the best to protect our customers and potential customers, right? Because we want others to be looking out for us as well. And honestly, that's why I joined Okta. At the end of the day, I really felt like I could make a difference somewhere on a broader scale than just working for a single organization, and that's something I wanted to do. So yeah, so that's kind of our perspective. I hope people found it interesting. And Neeraj, I don't know if you want to say any closing
Yeah,
thoughts.
no, I want to thank everybody for joining, and hopefully, the conversation David and I had was insightful, helpful, and I said we are here, to listen to you. Maybe we don't know everything, but we're learning as things are kind of evolving and maturing and kind of growing with all the innovation happening. But looking forward to seeing at least some of you at Octane, and if not there, maybe a one-on-one conversation with us to kind of see what we can help with, either a digital identity blueprint, fraud demo, or a data study. I can tell you any of these things would be value add, from some shape or form. But again, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, David.
Thank you. All right.